in the hall. Okay, we are on Mem Zayin Amar Aleph. Okay, the last thing we said was Amar Rab Zera, Amar Rab Asi, Amar Rab Yochanan, Amar Rab Yechinin, Amar Rab Munos. Li hit the Rebbe. Rebbe permitted me to go ahead again. Mem Zayin Amar Aleph 47a1. Rebbe permitted me litaltel machta beifara to move a pan with its ashes on the Shabbat, and he said that I was allowed to go ahead and move it. It wasn't a problem of mukseh. Now, the pan is generally made to to use to burn stuff, and and the something that's used to for the purpose of fire generally would be a muksa item, but a utensil that's used for isur, you could go ahead and move it if you need its place, or you need to use it in itself for a permitted fashion. And the question, but the ashes, the Gemara's understand the ashes that are contained in the pan have no use. They're like a stone that's on the ground, that's like money on Shabbat, that has no use. Nevertheless, since he was not handling the ashes directly, he gave him a permission to go ahead and move this pan that contained the ashes. That was the story that was reported in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, um, that Rabbi Yochanan quoted one of the rabbis, Rabbi Ramunos, who says that he got a dispensation, an allowance from Rebbe to move this pan that contains the ashes. So it was an indirect, not directly moving the ashes. So let's say you needed the pan for something, for some purpose, some permitted purpose, or you needed the place of the pan. He allowed him to go ahead and move the pan that contained the ashes. So on that, Amalei Rav Zera Rav Zera Ravasi, Mir Rabbi Yochanan Hachi. But that doesn't seem to be in sync with Rabbi Yochanan's general opinion. Well, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, now we have a Mishnah later on. Noitel beno, ve'evin biyodo. First, I could pick up a child. If a child has a stone in his hand, and the allowance to pick up the stone is a muksa item, and the child has a stone, and the only allowance the Gemara says you could pick up the child with the stone is because we're talking about a case where the child would get a little sick if his father doesn't pick him up with the stone in the kid's hand, and kalkula ve'evin betocha. If there was a basket, you're allowed to go ahead and move a basket with a stone in it, provided that there's fruits, it's full of fruits also. And the Gemara says, Rabbi Bachana said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, we're talking about a basket full of fruits. Since it's a basket full of fruits, so therefore the fruits become the dominant item in the basket. And the fact that there's a stone does not really bother us. And therefore, that's the only allowance. You can move the basket with the stone. Time it is by peri, only because it has fruits in the basket. Halet the peri, if it doesn't have fruits, low. If it doesn't have fruits, you would not be able to move the basket with the stone. So we see that it's considered a, good morning, Simon. It's considered we'll call it a basis. We'll consider it's holding mukseh, and we're going to look at it like you're carrying the mukseh itself. So how could you go ahead and say that you could go ahead and move the pan with the ashes? The ashes is the mukseh. It's like the stone. And the same way you can't go ahead and move the basket with a stone, according to Rabbi Yochanan, you should not be able to move the pan with the with the ashes. So if we say that according to Rabbi Yochanan, when the basket only has a stone in it, the basket becomes like supporting the mukseh, and therefore you should not be able to even tilt the pan. You can't even pick up. You can't even pick up the basket or tilt the basket. Because when you tilt the basket, you're moving the basket. You shouldn't be able to tilt the basket to remove the stone. So too, the ashes that are in the pan, you shouldn't be able to tilt the pan. You shouldn't be able to do anything with that pan when it contains the ashes, because the pan should have the same status as the ashes, and it should be mukseh. So that is the Gemara's question. How are you allowed to go ahead? What is the difference between the basket that holds the fruit, that only when and a stone, the only one has a fruit and the stone is permitted to move the basket, but if it doesn't have the fruit and the stone, if it only has a stone, you can't move it. And how are you allowed to go ahead and move this pan that contains the ashes? So the Gemara says, "Ishtomim kishachada." This was a strong question, and they did not. Abzera asked this question on Rabbi Yochanan's opinion. Rasi did not know how to answer this question. He was quiet for a while, for a short amount of time, and then he responded. He thought about it, and he responded. You know what? You have to say that this case over here with the pan that has the ashes also contains fragrance. It has this is a pan that was used for frankincense, and it has some of the frankincense left over that wasn't burnt up, and therefore these items, the frankincense is not mukseh because you can smell it, and therefore you can move the pan on the Shabbat even though it contains the ashes in it, since it has the frankincense that's also left in this in this pan. We are on
Why isn't frankincense mukseh also?
because frankincense you can smell. It has smelly. You can smell it. It's like samim, like spices, herbs. It has a
Uh,
use. That's what it's made to smell. One of the
I understand you can smell it, but I think of it like a candle.
right. So it has a nice smell as is. So therefore, that's similar to fruit.
But don't you burn it? Don't you burn it?
Like it sounds like um it's also you maybe they burn it, they get a much better smell most probably, but it sounds like it has a use now as is in its state to smell, um, and therefore it would not be considered mukseh, and therefore that really the pan is holding both the muksa item and the not muksa item. According to the Gemara now, the ashes and the frankincense, and therefore you could go ahead and move the pan. In contrast, when it only contains the stone, when something only contains a stone, a basket only contains a stone, that would be considered mukseh. We're on 47A1 on the right side. But the Gemara challenges this answer, meaning that you want to tell me because there's some pieces of frankincense left over. Abaye says, well, on the top right, Simon, right? 47A1, top right. Abaye, 4 lines from the top. Abaye says, Kartun be Rebbe Michashivi. The story of the pan with the ashes, with now you're saying it had frankincense inside, but there was little pieces, a little bit of frankincense left, but you're in the house of Rebbe. The story happened in the house of Rebbe, and in the house of Rebbe, little pieces of frankincense means nothing. Michashivi. Rebbe was the Nasi, Rebbe was the leading rabbi. He was very wealthy. As the Gemara describes his table, he always had delicacies on his table throughout the year. So if it has these little pieces of frankincense, since the frankincense is insignificant, so we shouldn't look at it like it's of any substance. So it's just like it has the ashes in the pan, and therefore it should be back to the drawing board. It's like the basket with the stone should be the pan with the ashes, because the frankincense is like it's not there. But what do you want to tell me? You want to tell me that the pan is supporting the frankincense, but since in the house of Rebbe the frankincense is insignificant, it should
Right.
be it should be like considered nothing. V'chi teima, and if you're going to tell me chazu la'aniyim, and if you're going to tell me that it is fit for poor people, meaning to say it's true. Rebbe himself, the frankincense has no significance, but poor people would use that. Poor people wouldn't throw it out, and therefore it's considered that it's holding something of importance because poor people will use it, and therefore it's not just supporting the ashes, and therefore that's why he permitted you to move the pan. So we know that's not true. Vatanya, we looked at the Braita. We don't say that. We say when it comes to big aniyim, if you have clothing, good morning, Mark.
Right.
There is clothing, and Mark walks in, and you have some clothing that's there's rich man's clothing and there's poor man's clothing. What does that mean? There's certain types of scraps of garments of material that a rich man would just throw out, wouldn't consider anything. Poor person would say, you know what? I'll use that. I'll use those scraps. They're not called insignificant. You know. So we have big aniyim. You have garments that a size of cloth that's only used for a poor person. They are considered laniyim. If they're owned by a poor person, they will be able to receive contamination when they're in the possession of the poor person.
Why?
Right, because let's say, in order for something to receive contamination, the garment has to have some sort of significance. If it's insignificant, if it has no significance, no use, so it's like a rib. So if it's no use, so then we say that that's considered something that will not be able to receive contamination. Just like, if it's something that's too small, won't receive contamination. So what's called too small? It depends on the world. As long as there are some people that use it, that gives it importance, or is it depends subjective to the person who owns the item? So we find this phenomenon that it says in the Breita, the Breita says that it's subjective. It depends on the person who owns that garment, whether that garment will receive contamination. So if the poor man owns this garment, a material that has 3 fingers by 3 fingers, so if it has 3 fingers by 3 fingers, that piece of material for him is considered, it has use. He would use it. He wouldn't throw it out. And therefore, it would receive, if he would own such a piece of garment, and a dead mouse, whatever touches, comes in contact with it, or a dead body, dead animal, they would receive contamination. A wealthy person, since he would throw this out, if it doesn't doesn't have the ability to receive contamination, that small piece of garment. So the Gemara wants to say the same thing should apply here. It should apply if this pieces of frankincense is significant for the rich man, and that was Rebbe's house, so that should be considered like it's nothing, just like the garment is not considered of anything. That's the Gemara's question, because Tanya, we looked at it right. The big aniyim, garments that are fit for poor people, if it only has 3 fingers by 3 fingers, or it's made from certain types of material, certain types of threaded a certain way. So laniim, if it's called a garment for big aniyim, laniim. The material that's used by a poor person is only considered a garment for the poor people and will receive contamination. Big ashirim, a garment that is fit for a wealthy person that they would use, that's lashirim.
The item for the poor person, once it's fit and receives contamination, is it contaminated to all?
Yes, it's contaminated at all.
Contaminated
To the rich man too, right? But it has the ability to receive contamination, exactly. But big day ashirim. Now what the Gemara and Rashi I think fills in the blank. There's something 3 fingers by 3 fingers is a very small. What is 3 fingers by 3 fingers? Very small piece of it. But the wealthy person, it's more 3 tfachim by 3, like 11 inches by 11 inches, is the size for a wealthy person to be something that they consider 11, but they won't throw it out in the garbage, right? So b'dei shirim la shirim. If it has 3 tvachim by 3 tvachim, that is what would go ahead and be considered a size that would be contaminated for a shirim, and certainly it would be a size that would be contaminated for the poor people. Avadaniyim la shirim lo, but a garment that a scrap that the poor person would save, but if it's owned by a wealthy person, that garment, that scrap doesn't receive contamination. So too, why shouldn't we consider these little pieces of frankincense that's left over in the pan, in this frankincense pan? Why shouldn't we consider this insignificant? And we should say that you should not be able to move this pan that contains the ashes. Don't tell me I can move the pan that contains the ashes because I have this frankincense stuff in it. It's insignificant in the house of Rebbe. So the Gemara so Abaye wants to say a different answer. Elam Abaye, he goes away from that answer before what the other rabbi said, and he comes up with another answer. Elam Abaye, we're now turning the bottom. Mide Dahavi Agraf Sharei. So Abaye says that the ashes, you don't have to say the frankincense was there. You don't have to. There was pieces of frankincense left over, but that would not be considered significant. That wouldn't change the game, right, Simon? It wouldn't make a difference. You have the frankincense in that pan with the ashes and not in the house of Rebbe. It wouldn't make a difference. So what's the story? But this is something disgusting. In Rebbe, you looked at, just like if there would be feces, the bowel, these type of. It's so disgusting, and therefore, out of respect for the people, covered a briot, the rabbis removed the prohibition of.
really bad.
So a pan ashes, and maybe in the house of a nasi, maybe because you're person who's a prince, person who is the leading rabbi, that kingship type of person, that maybe the haligraph sharei, that it's like that type of utensil that's made to use for feces. If the rabbis allowed you to bring it out to the garbage dump, take it out because it's disgusting, and that's the why he allowed him to move it. Omar Rava, Abaye and Rava, like Shammai and Hillel, they were like colleagues that argued on many issues, and here Rava did not accept Abaye's approach. Omar Rava states shuvot b'davar. I have 2 questions on your approach. You can't compare a graf sharei utensil that's used to hold and to contain, that's involved with feces, to a pan of ashes. Why? You have to know how the pan of ashes that their pan of ashes had a cover on top, and they had like holes perforated on the top so the smell could come, nice frankincense smell could come out. But it was covered; it wasn't like exposed. So therefore, it's not like a graf sharei. It's not disgusting like the utensil that's used for feces. And furthermore, the Gemara says it's not really like Mark was asking. It's really ashes so disgusting that you really we should make an allowance that remove the issue of muksa, that we say that's really something. Even though I made a case, maybe it's the house of Rebbe. House of Rebbe, you're the leading Nasi, you're the prince of Israel. He says, we have stories of Rebbe and Antoninus, right? Rebbe and the Roman emperor. They had a very big relationship. You know, I think the Roman emperor we should go, but no more. He had a special maybe tunnel to go to Rebbe's house, or however they had a tunnel made. They should meet each other. They learned with each other. There's a lot going on. You can't teach Torah to Goyim, but whatever the story was, Rebbe was a great influence on him. Ela Marava Kavinan Be again. Let's say again. Chadanim again. El Amarava. There's two questions. Graf Sharei Mois. Graf Sharei that utensil is disgusting. Vilahai Lo Mois. But the pan with the ashes is not so disgusting that we should allow you to move it on Shabbat. It has no purpose. Ashes, no purpose. It should be mukseh. And if I can't move the basket with the rock because the rock is mukseh, and that's called moving by moving the basket with the rock. So I shouldn't be able to move the pan with the ashes. Number two is graf sharei migalei. It's revealed. Therefore, it's very disgusting that container that's involved with the feces. But hi, mechasei, this is covered. Mekasei, it's covered, and therefore it's not seen. So the ashes, therefore, you can't compare the case of the ashes to the utensil that contains the feces. Elo my Rava. Therefore, Rava comes up with his own approach. It's at least the third approach, trying to address the apparent contradiction in Rabbi Yochanan and why they allowed the movement of this pan with ashes. That's the issue on the table. You don't allow the movement of the basket with the stone, and yet you allow the movement of the pan with the ashes. So he says, Kavina Rav Nachman, when we were in the house of Rav Nachman, and Havi Metalina Kanuna, we moved the Kanuna Agav Kitma. You had this utensil that they would go ahead and they would put fire in the utensil to bring the heat to the people. So it's a utensil that's malachto le'isul, right? It's used for fire. And now a utensil that's generally used in a prohibited way, something you can't do on Shabbat, right? A hammer is generally used for building. This utensil is used for putting fire inside and heat. So now, let's say the fire went out. There's no fire in this utensil. There's no fire in the utensil. And now, but you have in this utensil there was ashes. Agav kitma, because you needed the ashes that was inside was not mukseh. We needed to cover. Let's say that we said yesterday sometimes there was saliva, there was a wetness on the floor, or the ashes were used to as a purpose, and we prepared those ashes. The ashes were something that we prepared, we had in mind, designated before Shabbat, and we were able to remove it. And what's the chidush? What's the chidush that I could go ahead and use this utensil and move it with the ashes inside? What was the story with this utensil? This utensil had both ashes inside and little pieces of wood, broken wood, that you use for fuel, right? Pieces of wood are mukseh on Shabbat. They're like money. What usually have a little piece of firewood? Firewood is like money. What? Right, it has value, but just money also has value. But on Shabbat, money has no use.
No, I say it's valid, it's
Equal to money. Oh, that's the image. Very good. So now I have in this item, I have mukseh. This pan or this pot contains the mukseh item, which is the pieces of wood, and it has also in it the ashes that are useful ashes, or say better, ashes that I designated for use because I want to use it to cover up if the what there's
How
a
could I, say I want to make these ashes not upset?
right. You could go ahead before Shabbat. According to what the Gemara is saying, we could do a rock also. Now we saw there's a discussion exactly what do you need to do for a rock. Just have to designate it in your mind, say it. You have to make it do something in the rock. Make sure alternate it, whatever. Maybe we have to see exactly what you have to do with the rock. But you could make that rock non-mukseh by preparing it in some fashion. So too, the ashes. If we say just by right, if you say by just saying I'm going to use it, I'm planning on using these ashes, if that's sufficient or some other thing that they might do. So we're saying the Gemara is saying we're going back on how we thought the premise that we thought of the whole time was the pan that contained the ashes is mukseh. So how is he allowed to move? How is he allowed to move the pan with the ashes? So now we're saying no. The pan was not the ashes is not a muksa item, and the chidush is there's something else going on in the pan. What's going on in the pan? There's some pieces. There's some pieces. You have to say most probably there's some pieces of wood. Um, right. It was not burnt piece of wood, and Rashi says. Now, and Rashi says, so too, the story when they allowed him to move the pan with the ashes, Rashi says, that's also, you needed those ashes, and Rashi says, and you had in mind yesterday. Before Shabbat, you had in mind yesterday that you're going to use those ashes for any saliva that needs to, any spills, or let's say there's a baby that's toilet training and you might need it to cover up if the baby has an accident. So that's that you plan on using the ashes for that purpose. So therefore, it's the ashes are not mukseh. And you have hair, let's say, but there are little pieces of wood that are in the pan, but the ashes are more significant, more important than the pieces of wood in the pan, and more valuable than the muksa item. So therefore, you can move the pan with the ashes that are useful, even though we said the ashes are useful to clean up a wet mess on the floor. That's the. I look at it like sawdust. Sawdust is very useful in a wet area. That's what sawdust. I grew up with my father had a store. We grew up with sawdust, so I can tell you about sawdust.
That's a totally different texture.
Right,
It's very fine.
right.
How would it absorb any? It absorbs. It absorbs moisture. For sure it does. If you put ashes on top of a puddle, it will become like mud.
It'll do some sort of job. People, it might not be as good as it might not be as good as sawdust. I will tell you that. Sorry.
The comparison that they make.
Well, right. I use the sawdust. I'm just saying the Gemara is saying, listen, they use what I said sawdust. I'm using it as an example because remember, son, right? The Gemara, this is how they use it. Remember.
If there's a use, let's not argue about if there's a use. If there's a use for it, I could designate these ashes, say, I'm gonna use them on Shabbat.
Like the stone. That's how you said the
like
stone.
stone, and therefore I can move, period.
Period. Exactly. Not muktzah.
Forget the wood, who cares about the wood?
Right, just like the stone mark. You want to designate that stone? You want it for your door or whatever.
Do I have to, can I designate all the ashes in the bag?
Yeah, if you,
Seemingly, I have to.
yeah, right.
I can't say the right side, the left side.
Because if you do that, then some are muksa. Then the ashes will be
You
muksa.
can't separate.
I mean, hard to separate the ashes. You're saying.
Rocks, I could say this rock, that's this rock, that's it. That's rock's not.
Yeah, but let's say you say I'm going to use this the right side of the ashes. I'm going to use the left side. I'm not. It's hard to define the exact middle line.
And some of the ashes can move. It's not the same.
That's definitive.
Definitive. Rocks definitive. If you want to say even all the ashes.
That's the case. The words I'm saying you made all the ashes. I'm using all the ashes. I'm using all the ashes for use for any spills that I got. I'm planning on using those ashes. So the Gemara challenges this. Okay, Rava, that's your approach, and therefore it seems like now you understand why the rabbi allowed him to move the pan with the ashes, even though a little piece of wood in it, because the ashes. Right. We're not saying there's leftover frankincense. We're not saying that. We're saying we don't. When there's no right. We don't need frankincense. Right. But there has to be there's leftover pieces of wood that you would have thought might have made a problem here, but because it was balanced out by the ashes that were permitted to move, therefore. Well, that's why Rebbe said you can move this pan because the ashes that are useful are greater in value, more useful than the piece of wood. Just like we speak about the little piece of wood, right? Because what's in this thing is the little piece of wood that's in here, and therefore it is allowed to go ahead and move this pan. We'll see tomorrow the challenge on Rebbe's point. Have a great day, everybody. You too, everybody. But if there's a change, we'll take you Thursday. Sometimes the planes say, Simon, you heard that?